You mentioned that your mother was a psychic or had psychic abilities, or I'm not sure exactly the extent of it. And your dad was this sort of stern taskmaster, probation officer turned uh, lawyer turned judge.
Yes.
So I'm curious, thinking back to little Michael growing up, and you were observing that dynamic between those two. Did your dad buy into your mom's psychic work, or did he believe in the occult and those kinds of things, or was he an eye roller whenever she started speaking about that kind of stuff?
He wasn't an eye roller. He was stoic, and he was a man of his word. If he said he was going to do something, he did something, and he had the ability to read people very well in an instant. So he knew if a person was in integrity with what they were saying or not. So he just wasn't into it, like the way my mother was, but he didn't put it down. It was just something that it was just in the atmosphere. And later on in life, he would say something like, when I was deeply into my spiritual practice and my spiritual awareness, he just chalked it up all to faith. He had a faith, but he wasn't religious, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
He just felt that if you walked right, things would work out for you well. And that's kind of how he lived. Now, my mom, she was the one in the family that, for instance, if somebody, we were from DC originally. I was born in Bethesda, Maryland, lived in DC for a few years until my father moved us out to Los Angeles. But so most of my relatives were in DC, and we would go back for the summer to see the family. So whenever somebody made their transition, my mother would leave and escort them to the other side. And then they would say to her, Alice, it's not your time, you have to go back. Then she would wake us up and say, Aunt so-and-so just passed, cousin so-and-so just passed. And then the phone would ring, and it'd be our relatives from Washington, D.C. saying, Aunt so-and-so had just passed, or cousin so-and-so had just passed. So we grew up kind of knowing that there was something else happening, that there was another world beyond this one, that life didn't end at the death of the body temple. So that was a part of the dynamic. But interestingly enough, my mother was slightly afraid of it, not frightened, but she didn't walk, it was things that would happen, but she didn't pursue it till later on in life when I had my spiritual awakening and began to really go full force in this direction. Then she picked everything back up, and she started going into deeper practice of meditation and prayer and study, going to metaphysical churches and things like that. So it was interesting how my awakening then jumpstarted her natural ability that she had from a very young age. Yeah.
And what were some of the first breadcrumbs that you recall as a younger person that you were going to have an awakening one day? Like, I remember one time, I got hit in the head with a baseball bat when I was playing catcher with my brother. I was probably 8 years old. He was 9, and he swung the bat and he let it go, and it hit me right here, right in my third eye.
Wow.
And I have this knot still here to this day.
Wow.
From that. And looking back now, I figured that was my way of, unlocking all of that in a very quick way. Did you have
something got opened up?
Yeah, something got opened up back then, because I'm different from my other brothers. They're all sweet people. They're wonderful, but I'm definitely the one that was more curious, and the one that was just the religion thing didn't really make a lot of sense to me. So what was your experience as a younger person before you had, you're actually seeing words light up on pages and this kind of thing?
Well, I there's a couple of experiences I had. One, now I just thought of another one, just getting ready to tell you this one. But both of them were around the same age. I was in the 5th or 6th grade. One, I can remember the teacher's name. Her name was Miss Axe. She used to wear a little axe to help us remember her name. And we planted gardens at the school. And then for a homework assignment, we had to have a niche in our backyard. We had to grow our own garden. And she gave us seeds, and at school taught us how to plant them and take care of them, the whole deal. She was trying to connect us with nature. So one of the things that we grew were carrots and radishes. So I always had this experience where I remember growing radishes. And then one day I went in the backyard and I pulled the radish out of the ground and I looked at it and I bit into it. And when I bit into this radish, suddenly, now this is the language now, it wasn't the language as a 5-year-old, but this is the experience. I suddenly realized that biting into this radish, I was connecting to the entire universe, that everything was in the radish. And now I ran into the house and I was trying to explain to my mother that I bit this radish and the radish was everything. I didn't have the language. I remember her just looking at me quizzing. What are you talking about, Michael? Is the radish good? I said, yeah, the radish is good, but everything is in it. You know, I didn't have the language for the fact that all of the presence is in everything, you see. So I can remember that moment was very distinct in my mind. And then the next year, I remember I was in the 6th grade. I think the teacher's name was Miss Adler. It's interesting how I'm remembering these teachers' names. And I went to the restroom. I came back and my name was on the blackboard as to run for the treasurer of the school. And I said, no, I declined. I was very shy. I didn't want to be involved in anything like that. And Miss Adler said, no, you can't decline. The class nominated you. You can't decline. You have to run for this office. And I was not really happy about this. And we had to do 2 things. One, we had to go to different classrooms and give these little mini speeches as to why we should be elected. And then it culminated with an assembly where the whole school came in the auditorium and you gave a speech in front of the whole school. Now I was dreading this. So I did the little speeches. We had little signs up, Beckwith, you know, that type of thing. And I remember getting up to speak and suddenly something took over. And I began to speak about excellence and being an excellent student and rising into your field of excellence to serve. And all of this was just pouring out of me. And I sat down and the audience was stunned at what had happened. They didn't know what all of this poured out of me. And I was sitting there like, I didn't know what had happened, and then it went into like this applause, and the teacher looked at me and says, wow, Michael, and because I was not really, one-on-one, I was good, but in a group, that wasn't really my thing. All that week, I remember trying to get back into the little paradigm of Michael. Like, that wasn't me up there. I don't know what happened. I don't know what that was, but this is the real me. I was trying to get my agreement back with mediocrity, And so that was one little experience. And then another time, prior to both those experiences, I was in my backyard and I was watering the lawn. And I remember having this thought, the lawn was brown, and I remember having this thought that I wanted the lawn to be green. I was watering it to be green. So I closed my eyes. When I opened my eyes, the patch had turned green. It shocked me. It was green. So I ran in the house. Mom, the grass is green. The grass is green. And she came out and looked at it and she said, yes. I said, no. It's only green right here. The whole lawn is brown. I was watering right here. And I had this thought that I wanted the grass to be green and it became green. And she kind of just said, okay, Michael, that's beautiful. That's sweet. But I know for a fact as a kid, that grass was brown. And then I watered it for a long time and then had this awareness that the grass was green. So there was little pinpricks of the other, little pinpricks of expanded awareness that I quite couldn't understand, but I know they happened. I know they happened. Yeah.
So you brushed shoulders with Martin Luther King Jr. at one point as a child. Did that inform your decision to go to Morehouse?
It did. It did. I got accepted to Brown University. They wanted me to run track there, some other places. But I wanted to go to Morehouse. I wanted to be around other African Americans. And Dr. King had gone there. He was the alumnus of Morehouse. And so that's where I decided to go. And I met Dr. King when I was 11, I think. 11 or 12. And he was at the Holman's Methodist Church on a West Coast swing to raise money for SCLC.
Mm-hmm.
My mother took me. He spoke, obviously. I shook his hand, and his hand was really soft. He said some words to me, thank you for coming out to see me, young man, and, some things. And I remember saying to my mom, his hands are really soft. And she said, he does a different kind of work, baby, like that. But yeah, I met him. And then coincidentally, well, not coincidentally, but his daughter, Yolanda, became a member of Agape.
Mm.
She was a member. And I'll tell you this little story. A friend of mine wanted me to go see this psychic. His name was Dead Larry. They didn't call him that to his face. His name was Lauren, but he channeled dead people. And so Stephen kept saying, I want you to go see Dead Larry. I said, man, I don't need to go see anybody. I have a connection. I don't need to go see anybody. Plus I have friends that are very intuitive. He said, you need to go see him and you're going to really like this. I said, I'm not going, Steve. He said, I'll pay for it. I said, okay, I'll go. So it was $200. It was a number of years ago. So I go in to see Lawrence. And the first thing he says to me is, my grandmother comes through and says, where's that ruby ring that my husband gave you? And I said, you know what happened to the ruby ring. Your son was jealous that his dad passed him up and gave the ring to me and took it while I was washing my hands. And she says, I know. I just wanted you to know this was me, like that. So I had rushed out of the house that day. So I didn't do my morning meditation the way I normally did. And she said, practice what you preach. You didn't do your full meditation today. I said, I know, Grandma, I'm just trying to get here on time, Anyway, long story short, as we go through these readings of different relatives coming through, he says, I have somebody that's not a member of your physical family, but he really wants to speak to you. And I said, okay. His name is Martin Luther King Jr. I said, really? So Dr. King comes through and he starts to tell me that when I'm teaching these universal principles was where he was heading, but the civil and human rights movement had pulled him in that direction, which was very necessary. But this was the path that he was on as well, applauded me for the work I had done and would do. And then he said this to me, thank you for changing my daughter's life. And I said, who? And he said, Yolanda. Now, at the time, Light, I had not met her yet. I said, I've never met her. And then his head, the Lawrence's head twisted to the right really fast and back. He says, oh, I'm looking into the future. The very next Sunday, Yolanda comes to Agape, ends up going to Egypt with me. And going to Egypt, the land of Kemet, changed her whole life when she realized that was the birthplace of all the major religions. And that her father, her grandfather, great-grandfather were all Baptist ministers. But when she went to Egypt with me, everything opened up for her. And then she joined Agape and her whole mind opened up. And so that reading with that psychic said, yeah, thank you. So she became a very dear friend until she passed over. And then her mother, Coretta Scott King, flies in to see what her daughter's up to because, they were Baptist. Family was Baptist. What was she joining? What is this thing? So Rosa Parks had already come and had shared with Coretta, this is a really good place. And so Coretta came and she sat in the front row looking at me, listening to every word I had to say. At the end of the service, she says, this was quite profound. This is very beautiful. It sounds like exactly what my husband would appreciate. And then later on, she wrote me a letter stating that what I was building was what her husband lived and ultimately gave his life for. Thank you for taking care of my daughter. And so then now, when Martin Luther King III came, he sat in the same seat his mother sat in, coincidentally. And now I'm really good friends with both him, his wife, and I'm the mentor for their daughter, Dr. King's granddaughter. So it's like this whole dynamic of connection to the King family. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm from Montgomery, Alabama, and I grew up on Rosa Parks Avenue, which is just, they changed the name from Cleveland Avenue to Rosa Parks. Cleveland Avenue bus was the one that she took
Ah,
when it started the whole thing. And Dexter Avenue Baptist Church was King's Church. It was my dad's church. So he was my dad's preacher
wow.
and Sunday school teacher. So it's just a really interesting full circle moment right now. That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
Well, you don't hear a lot of people leaving Morehouse and going to USC. It's usually the other way around. What was what was
Well,
the impetus for that?
well, I had a child, and my girlfriend lived in Los Angeles. So after a couple of years at Morehouse, I thought it best to go back to Los Angeles and be with my kid. And then Morehouse was also, I loved Morehouse. I loved it. I still kind of feel like a Morehouse man, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Because I go back to speak at their Crown forums, and I just had a conversation yesterday with Lawrence Carter, the archivist and the director of the Martin Luther King Chapel there. So I'm still connected to Morehouse. So I came back to Los Angeles. Oh, I was going to say that when I went to Morehouse, coming from Los Angeles, the teachings in LA were more expansive. And when I went back to the South at that time, they were trying to, some of the classes were trying to make me think a certain way, not just teach me how to think, but they wanted me to think a certain way. And I always remember having this history class, and we had to write about the Vietnam War. And I remember articulating my point of view on it, and the teacher disagreed with me and gave me a C. And I remember saying, no, I'm not here to agree with what I'm here to articulate my ideas, back up the facts with my particular research. You can't grade me down because I don't disagree. The Vietnam War was an unjust war. We were on the wrong side of history. Anyway, I remember going to the dean to get my grade rescinded, and the dean remember telling me to just to play along. Now, at 18 years old, I didn't know how to play along. It was like, no, I'm not going to play along, Anyway, I loved Morehouse, but eventually I left, and I went to USC. And that's an interesting story if you want to hear that too, because at
I would love
Morehouse,
to, yeah. Because
at
those are also
Morehouse,
your atheist years as well, right? In
yes,
Morehouse. Yeah.
yeah. At Morehouse, I helped start what was called the Harriet Tubman Prison Committee. And we were working to make sure that the prisoners were getting just pay for the work that they were doing while in prison, and they're being treated like human beings. And so we had rallies at City Hall. I was a part of the Black Workers Congress. I was very activist, revolutionary. And so subsequently, when I come back to Los Angeles, I'm still a part of these groups, and I'm sitting in a meeting. We're going to change the world by any means necessary. I'm in this meeting, and I hear somebody behind me say, if you were to take over the world tomorrow, would not just me personally, but the group, would the world be any different? So I looked around to see who was there. There was nobody standing there. So we went on with the meeting, and then it said it again, but it was coming from inside of me. If you were to take over the world tomorrow, would the world be any different? So I looked around the room, and I could see the pathology of the people in the room. This person was territorial. This person was run by his ego. This person always had to be right. I could see all the little things. And I said to myself, well, the world wouldn't be any different. We have an ideology, a revolutionary ideology to change the world. But the world would be exactly the same, because everyone, this person has to be right. This person's power hungry. This person wants. I said, wow. I mean, it just hit me. So I never went back to that meeting. The next week in that meeting, somebody shot somebody. An argument ensued. Somebody pulled out a gun and shot somebody. I wasn't there to be a part of the whole legal thing that went down. And I didn't have anything to put in that space of activism. Anyway, I was out half a semester. I decided, so I enrolled at USC. And then as I enrolled in USC, the spiritual experiences started to really become more intense. until, I actually thought for a period of time that what was going on inside of me was pathological. Transpersonal psychology had not really come into full sway at that time. So I thought I was going crazy,
You
seeing
were a
it.
psychobiology major too, so you were reading about stuff like this, right?
Yeah, right. And this was all pathological. What I was going through, hearing voices, seeing things. And I was doing astral travel, a lot of astral traveling at the time, but I hadn't studied any of that. So I didn't know what it was. But I do remember testing it out. And I'd get this ringing in my ear, and I would leave and go to my mom's house and see her cooking, and I'd call her. Do you have on a blue dress? Yes. Are you cooking chicken right now? Yeah. So I knew the experience was authentic, but I didn't have any context as to what was happening to me, but I knew something was going on, but I didn't have any, I left the church at the age of 16 because I couldn't get with the Christian theology, the way it was being taught. And so anyway, after a period of time, it burst into an awakening that forever changed the trajectory of my life. Yeah.
So you had a new baby that you were helping to support. How were you making money at the time?
At two things. I was working in a store and I was dealing marijuana.
you knew where I was going with that.
had a job and I had a job. I had a job and I had a hustle.
Were you just, it seems like, you've studied in the elite schools with people, and obviously you knew better than selling marijuana, or did you have like a system, like, as long as I don't do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to be fine? And
well, I actually started
I'll
out
be under the radar.
Yeah, I actually started out, it was really small, just for a few people, but it kept growing.
Yeah.
Oh, and it grew to the point where I had people working for me in Nashville and in Atlanta and LA and different places. And it became like a really powerful industry.
Yeah, you became Avon Barksdale from The Wire.
Before it was legal, it was in I used to, on the back of my car, I'd have my books in my car. My book said US for USC. And I had on the back of my car, I had this double-sided tape, support your local police, on my bumper. Sometimes these fake studious glasses. So I look way other than a lot of the people, the rappers or whatever, wearing all these chains, or people advertising that they're involved in some kind of shenanigans. I look like a student, So I was trying to be under the radar totally. But I knew that wasn't my destiny,
Yeah.
It just grew to the point where I paid USC in cash money.
Were you still thinking you'd be a doctor one day?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was still on that path. I was on that path all the way up until I had the awakening, the first adult awakening. And
that was
even
the
then,
dream.
Yeah, that was the dream, the lucid dream in which I was killed.
Mm-hmm.
That was painful, emotionally and psychologically. I was stabbed in the heart and I died. And when I woke up from it, I could see the beauty of the presence that's indescribable everywhere. I sometimes say, even in a piece of lint, even in garbage, even the things you don't think the divine is there, divine is everywhere. And the love that penetrated my being was beyond any description of love. It was just a total love. Mm-hmm. And I just remember being in this state, and I could see, full dimensionally, because I wasn't seeing with my eyes, I could just see with consciousness. And so then my life changed to discover what had happened to me. I needed to know what was this. And then that's when I began to research and bumped back into the mystical teachings of Jesus and the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads and Walter Russell, which is a mystic that came out of America. And then I was able to appreciate Dr. Thurman, who I met at Morehouse. I heard him speak at Morehouse, and it did affect me. And I had a chance to have conversation with him and other teachers, George Washington Carver, who was a great mystic. And I began to like just go full bore into this. Nothing was important to me. Nothing else was important other than my connection with this presence that was more real to me than anything else in the world. I can remember thinking, people are running around here and they're trying to make money. They're trying to get this. They don't understand. That's child's play. There's a whole reality here that people aren't even participating in. I can remember these thoughts in my awareness, and hours and hours of meditation, fasting. I lost all my friends. I didn't have any friends because people said Michael had freaked out on Jesus, and I didn't get high anymore. I didn't drink. I didn't do anything like that. So people just.
Well, you did have that one last delivery that you had to get rid of.
That one last one. Yeah, that's the one that really gave me a great miracle. Mm-hmm. And that was I can see it right now in my living room. My last dope deal. Now, interestingly enough, I was already moving out of it before the experience, before the arrest, before everything was. This was not my destiny. So I'm having these inner experiences, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm sitting, and this is the last dope deal, and it's the only time I ever had contraband in my house, because I had a person that worked for me, and they had a stash house. So whenever there was a delivery, it would generally be delivered there, and then I had a distribution network. This one time, because he was out of town, I had it delivered to my house. And anyway, long story short, the police came in. They actually took me from the street and brought me to the house where the marijuana was. Everything they did was illegal, but it doesn't matter. They brought me to the house and asked me, was this mine? I said, no, I don't live here. So I had a different address on my license. They subsequently took me to the police station, handcuffed me, went and got a search warrant, then came back, uncuffed me, took me to the house, and arrested me as if they had gotten a search warrant and came into the house. They did everything wrong. This is all little details that don't matter at this point, but I hire Harry Weiss as my attorney. And now the inner voice told me I was walking totally free. It already said, this is not your destiny. Don't even worry about it. And that's when everybody thought I was crazy.
Yeah. You were sitting in the court reading spiritual books.
I was reading a pamphlet by Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh called Chaotic Meditations, when it was just a pamphlet. He didn't have all these books.
Right.
I'm reading that book, and I'm reading a couple of other books. I'm paying attention to what's happening in the courtroom, but I'm meditating and I'm reading, because I've already been told I'm walking. I don't know how I'm going to walk, but I've already been told I'm going to walk. So everybody's saying Michael's freaked out on Jesus. He's crazy. They're telling him you should leave the country. Once the locals get to you for all that marijuana, the feds want you because they found all those guns in your house. I said, no, I'm not even going to have a record. So now everybody just thinks I'm nuts. So I'm sitting in court, and the trial's going on with continuances, and it's not really a trial yet. We haven't even got totally past arraignment, but continuance. And then at one point, the prosecutor is interviewing a policeman, a motorcycle cop that wasn't even on the scene. He wasn't even there, but he said he was. So they're interviewing him, and they said, why did you go to Mr. Beckwith's house? He says, well, an informant told us that a big drug deal was going down. So we went and got a search warrant, and then we staked out the house. And then when we saw the drugs being delivered, we went in with our search warrant and we arrested Mr. Beckwith, blah, blah, blah. None of this is true, obviously. But so the assistant attorney jumps up and says, that's hearsay evidence. We demand that the informant stand in front of the accused and identify him, or we demand that the case be thrown out of court. So the judge says, everybody, come up, defense attorneys, prosecutors, and says to them, I need the informant here within 3 days, or I'm gonna have to let Mr. Beckwith go. So we come back to court 3 days later, and the prosecutor says, Your Honor, the informant is afraid for his life. He will not come. And the judge said, Mr. Beckwith, I have no other recourse but to set you free. You may go. I hope I never see you in my courtroom again. I said, Your Honor, you never will. And I walked out totally free, no record, nothing. I'm free. I go home and the wind is blowing. My neighbor's house has a weather vane, and it's pointing, obviously the wind is blowing it, so it's pointing in the direction of the weather vane, the weather, the wind. And I was saying, God, this means what I think it means. It's something to do with my destiny. And I'm trying to get some language like, what does this mean? I want that weather vane to point in my direction if this means what I think it means. Before I can finish, the weather vane turned and pointed right at me. And I just started crying. I just sobbing like a baby. And I surrendered my life to the presence of God and never looked back. Now, the funny thing about this is I was followed for a number of months by police. They went to so many spiritual communities. They went to so many retreats. They went to so many. they must have grown spiritually, because I went to Paramahansa Yogananda. I went there to meditate. I went to hear every guru that came in town. My whole life was just totally about anything about the spirit, and then let me tell you with one other little miracle that happened. So we're back in the house now, me and my wife and my kid, and a fire breaks out in the kitchen, in our kitchen, and flames are coming out of the kitchen. And so we grab the kid and a few things, and we run out of the house. Fire department comes and puts the fire out. So a few days later, the insurance company, so they had it all taped up. At the time, I had to stay with my parents. It's all taped up. You can't get in because of the fire damage. So the insurance company comes. We have to meet the insurance company there to, go over the assessment and how much we'll get to rebuild and paint and blah, blah. The insurance assessor could not find where there was a fire. Nothing was burned. Nothing. The only damage was the water from the fire department. Now, we know flames were coming out of the kitchen. We know flames were all on the wall. There was smoke. There was like smoke damage, but no fire damage. What that did was it allowed us to have a complete remake of the apartment. We stayed in the duplex, a complete remake of the duplex. New rug, new paint, new everything. It was a new house while I was staying at my parents' house. And so when my old friends were trying to come by, all they saw was a tape and figured I had moved. So when we finally moved back into the duplex, it was brand new, had no old visitors coming to see me to get anything, and new life started, But I always remember that there was the fire that didn't burn anything.
Your Moses moment.
Yeah.
So take us through like a little montage now, because now you're starting to recognize that your path is going to be something to do with this love, beauty, presence that you were identifying it as. And this is like an inflection point, I believe, for a lot of people who feel some sort of spiritual calling. Like, do I monetize it? How do I make money with this? Do I help people? Do people come to me and ask me to help them? And take us through like meeting Reginald, aka Nirvana Gale, and having that conversation to do something a little bit bigger.
Well, I knew Nirvana. I knew him as Reggie. We grew up on the same block. And
that was your only friend you had left, right?
Well, what happened was when I had this experience And I had certain people that I knew. I went back and told them. I said, because we were all atheists together, atheists slash agnostic, revolutionaries. We're going to change the world. Religion is the opiate of the people. And so he was the last person I went to see, to say, listen, all this stuff we were talking before, it's not real. There's a presence, there's a power, there's a love, there's an intelligence back of everything. So anyway, everybody else just thought I was crazy. They were through with me. So I go to Reggie's house. His name was Reggie at the time. And his girlfriend is Debbie. They live together. And I walk in and Debbie's in the living room. And I said, I just came to tell you, I've had these visions and, life is eternal and there is a presence. We don't have to call it God necessarily, and I'm just speaking. I said, so this is where my life is heading. I have to go deep into this connection. And Reggie is walking down the hallway and he hears me talking to Debbie and he pipes up and says, I believe you. He says, I believe what you're saying. He said, I'm starting to think along those lines myself. So then that's when we together went on this adventure of discovery of the metaphysical teachings and the practices of meditation and all of that. We were heaven bent. That was the most important thing. And now I had somebody to travel with, because before it was alone, and yeah, that's and he's gone. He's made his transition now. But interestingly enough, his wife is working with my university here at Agape. He's a great being, great practitioner as well. Yeah. So
was he going out to the beach with you when you were doing that, or was this before that period of time?
When I was going out and working, when I was working with the mayor.
No. When you were taking your shoes off and just feeling that presence.
That was generally a solo trip.
Okay.
Yeah, when I'd go out to the beach. At one point, you were talking about making money, and the story behind that is, I remember sitting in my living room, and I didn't have a job now, okay, and I'm soaring in the presence. So I'm thinking, okay, God, what do you want me to do? The phone rang. And there was a woman on the phone who I went to high school with. And she says, "Is this Michael Beckwith?" I said, "Yes, it is." And she said, "I was looking at your picture in our high school annual and I saw your phone number. I decided to call you because God told me that you could help me." I said, "Really?" Now, at this particular stage, I don't have any licenses. I had no therapy license, nothing. I'm just Michael. I just in this expanded awareness. And she said, "Yeah." So I start to counsel her over the phone. And she starts to send me donations. And she starts to tell other people, you should call this guy if you're having issues. So people are calling, sending me donations, etc. So one night I go to this restaurant and she's in line. I hadn't seen this lady since the 12th grade. Okay. So it's been, 4, 5, 6 years. And I see her in line. And I call her name and she looks at me and she leaves because she was so embarrassed that she had given me all these deep, dark secrets of her life and her regrets and mistakes she had made and the way she was judging herself. She looked at me and thought I was judging her for the stuff that she had done with her life. I had no judgment. I was in prayer for her. So then I go home and I think about what just happened. She never called me again. Never heard from her again in all these years. And then I realized something. One, I didn't have that phone number in high school. So it couldn't have been on my annual because I've moved. I'm an adult. I don't live with my parents. I have my own phone number. And two, the phone number is unlisted. So she was either lying about seeing it under my picture in the album, or she got it some kind of way, but definitely didn't. My phone number was not out there. It was totally unlisted. I didn't give my phone number out to anyone, but it made me be on my path towards being a spiritual practitioner, spiritual therapist. People would come and seek assistance from me. So then what happened was my mother and a family friend by the name of Lissa Sprinkles, they were attending Founders Church of Religious Science, and they were attending the Guidance Church of Religious Science. And they were trying to get me to go. And I was saying, I'm not going to anybody's church. I don't need to do a church. The church, no, it's not too much truth happening in church. And they said, no, this is different. You need to come. It's not like the regular Christian churches where they're damning you to hell and saying they're the only way to get to heaven. It's not any of that. Please come. So at the behest of my mom and Lissa, I go to the Guidance Church of Religious Science. The teacher was, the founder was Dr. Daniel L. Morgan. So I come in, in my early 20s, come in a little late. He's already speaking. And I come walking in and I hear him say, heaven and hell aren't merely places, they're states of consciousness. And I say, he's right. What? This is going on in church? I mean, I was like excited. What? I said, he's right. And everybody turns to look at this young boy walking down the aisle saying, Dr. Dan is right. So I sat down, I listened, I couldn't find any holes in what he was saying. And it was all pure metaphysical principles. And so that was a Sunday. Monday, he had a 15-week class on metaphysics. So I show up and it was week 7. And he says, what is your name, sir? I said, Michael Beckwith. He says, Mr. Beckwith, this is a 15-week class. You've arrived at week 7. I would appreciate it if you would leave and come back when we start over. And I said, with all due respect, Dr. Dan, I'm going to stay, finish. And when it starts over, I'm going to start over and take the whole thing again. And he looked at me. He says, okay, you can stay like that. But that's when I discovered that there was a license called a practitioner, a spiritual therapist. I said, wow, that's what I'm doing, And subsequently, I ended up going to that spiritual community and taking all the classes. And I was still doing meditation retreats. I was still doing my own thing. I was doing that, and that propelled me into eventually, becoming a licensed practitioner, which I did for 7 years with full time. That's all I did. 7 years. Saw 6 to 8 people every single day, 6 days a week. Saw a lot of miracles through prayer with people. But prior to that, I worked for the mayor's office. I worked for Tom Bradley for 5 years. I worked in the 8th district. I ran the senior citizen affairs of that area. Built the Golden Gate Senior Citizen Resort with a guy named James Burke and Ernie Sprinkles. I'm the one who helped get the pavement in the ground where they could wheelchair access. It's paved. I had a big movement to get that for the seniors and for people who are in wheelchairs. And then I worked for something called prison preventers. There's a guy named Lyle Kawasaki, who was a part of the Japanese mafia. And when he was in prison, he had an awakening. And when he got out, he started prison preventers, which was to give pardons for criminals who, needed to assimilate back into society. So I was his personal assistant for a number of years. And then eventually, I was taking my oral examination to be a practitioner. One of the guys on my panel said to me, wow, I really love your consciousness. I'd like for you to come work for me. And I said, who are you? I didn't know who he was. He said, my name is Bob Love. I run the International Prayer Ministry. I want you to come work for me. And I said, okay, let's talk about this after obviously I'm passing the interview. You try to hire me. I said, well, when we finish, let's talk about it. Now at the time, I had just finished operating the Census Bureau office for Compton. And up until that time, Compton would always come into second to the last place in doing the census in terms of accuracy, proficiency, et cetera. So when I went there, I turned the office into like an ashram, non-religious ashram. I had a place where people would go in and do affirmations. We would do contemplations. I couldn't call it prayer meditation because it's the federal government. So I had all of this going on. And we came in second in the nation in terms of accuracy, completion for the census for Compton, and changed a lot of lives. People went back to school after being in the flow of what I was teaching. So these individuals from the federal government flies out to see what I was doing. They think I'm a little odd. So I have these little places where you can go close the curtain and sit in and have moments of reflection before you go out and do the census, all kinds of things that were off the beaten path. This is a long time ago. And so anyway, they offered me a job. They said, they were going to give me a car. They wanted me to go around to different federal offices and act and do some of these processes. And the money was really nice. And then I'm offered this job at the prayer ministry. The money was not so nice.
It's not a lot of money in praying, huh?
There wasn't a lot of money at the prayer ministry. And so, but I'd already been shown by some previous miracles that my needs would be met directly from source. So not telling my wife at the time, I took the job with the lower amount of money because I knew my destiny was with the prayer ministry. And then I took that job. And then I was a full-time licensed therapist. But my full-time licensed therapist made way more money than what I was making at my job. So my needs were met. And it gave me, you can stop me anytime, but you're making me go down memory lane here.
I love it.
But it made me realize that having to pray every single day for people, something happened. And the night before, I would meet people in my dreams that would call the next day. So before they called, I was already meeting with them, praying for them. So when I would answer the phone the next day, I knew who these people were and already knew what they were going to pray for. Now that kind of facility amplified itself because I was praying every day for so many people answering the phone. So it became, so that's why today I try to implore people to meditate, to pray. This is the quickest way to open up your channels, you see. Yeah.
And for the listener, can you just give a brief synopsis of what affirmative prayer is? Like, what were you actually doing that was different from what the traditional praying would be?
Well, in traditional prayer, they have intercessory prayer. They have a kind of a begging, an external deity to give you stuff, things of that particular nature. Affirmative prayer is you're putting yourself in a state ultimately to have a realization that what you're praying for, you already have. It's an actual moment where you're coming to an awareness that if it's abundance, if it's health, or whatever it is, it's intrinsic to your nature. So it moves you beyond merely believing that this is so to having an inner realization that this is so. So you move through a sense of gratitude, you move to a sense of recognition of the presence that's everywhere, a sense of unity with the presence, a sense of inner realization that what you're praying for is already happening, a sense of being grateful, thankful that it's happening. Then you release it and go on about your business, not trying to dig up the seed after you planted it. And then what happens is you're expanding your awareness. And then what I teach is prayer does not bring you the answer, but prayer is the vibrational answer. Prayer is it's the vibration of the answer. And then that answer condenses itself into your life of experience. Yeah.
So you were doing good work, but you had an intuitive hit that the work wasn't good enough, that there was more that you were meant to be doing, and things started falling apart. And next thing you know, you find yourself in Mexico having some vision.
You've really done your homework well. Yeah. I was working at the prayer ministry. I was the director of training at the prayer ministry. I was on the faculty at the university there teaching. And I had my private clientele, and I was doing seminars. A lot of them out of my living room, a lot of it renting places and things like that. I was doing all of this. So part of me was like, I'm doing well. I was doing seminars before they were popular. You know what I mean? Now it's like a thing. But I knew I was being pulled to start a community. But I was resisting it. I was like, I really don't want to, I like my weekends. I'm really, don't, and I remember a couple of things happened. One, when I said yes, well, first of all, I had a crook in my neck that I was go to the chiropractor on a regular basis to get fixed. He put it into place. I could turn my neck to the right. Quickly, though, after a while, it would become sedentary again. It becomes stuck, and I couldn't have full rotation to the right. I could go to the left, but I couldn't go to the right. So when I finally said yes to establishing a spiritual community, my neck popped into place. I never had to go back to the chiropractor. That this condensation of energy was my resistance towards the destiny that was trying to come forward. I do go to Mexico. I think it was Cancun. No, it was Puerto Vallarta. I think it was. And I actually saw Agape. I had a vision of it. I remember coming back to Los Angeles and telling the director of the prayer ministry that I was going to be leaving. I was going to start a community. And she said to me, where? And I said, I've been advised to start it in Santa Monica. And she says, why don't you start a community for your own people? And I said, short people? And she turned red and felt embarrassed, because she was saying, why don't you start it in the hood? Why don't, why, for Black people? And then she was so embarrassed about saying that. And eventually I started my vision group, pull people together in my living rooms. I had 3 groups of people that I pulled from. There was my private clientele. People were always saying, well, if you ever start anything, please let me know. And I'd always say, I'm not going to start anything, don't worry, And then there was I was teaching a practitioner class at the time. And they were always saying to me, if you ever start anything, we're going to be right there with you. Okay. And then there was people that from the seminars I was doing. So anyway, I curated a number of people to meet in my living room. I started this vision group. Nirvana Gale was there. I can see Deborah Johnson there. I can see Joan Stedman. I can see Bill Ruppel. I can see Eunice Shelfine. I can see all these people. I can see them all now. Coco Stewart. They're all ministers. I started this vision group to open up to the possibility of catching a vision for a spiritual community and then becoming the vibration of it. Number of months, just meeting every week to become the frequency of the community we wanted to birth. So it wasn't about business plans, wasn't about linear strategy. It was about becoming the consciousness of agape, the consciousness of love, the consciousness of connection, and then letting that determine the actions. And on November the 30th, 1986, we had our very first service 36 years ago. And
was there any politics involved when you left the Guided Church of Religious Science to do your own thing?
I think that when I left, there was a couple of things that happened. One, before I left, I was, I mentioned everything I was doing at the time. One of my students in my practitioner class was a part of a church in Fullerton. They didn't, and the minister had left. And they asked me, would I come speak? I said, sure. I came and spoke. The congregation wanted me to be the minister. And I said, I don't really think this is a fit for me. I said, I don't mind guest speaking, but I don't think I'm to be the minister of this church. And they just bugged me. And I said, okay, I'll put my hat in the ring and see what happens. So I began to speak. The congregation, they filled out a poll, and like 99.9% of people wanted me to be the minister. But there's a small group of people that was controlling the board, it was called the selection committee, would not turn my name in because they were saying things like, we can't have a Black man as a minister in Orange County. The property values are going to go down. There's going to be trash on the lawn. They had all these stereotypes about Black people. They're going to drive their lawns and they're going to put their cars on the front lawn. And now, unbeknownst to these people, is that my students, 2 of them were on that board.
Mm.
So they thought that these people were thinking like them. So they would get in these so-called private rooms and they just be talking about me. We can't let this be minister of the church. How are we going to stop this? So I've graduated now, obviously, from the School of Ministry. My first ministerial meeting, I'm walking across the campus, and a big-time minister who I had much respect for was speaking. I could hear him through the window. He was saying, there's a travesty happening. We have to pray to stop it. And I wonder what that is. He said, there's this Black guy that's trying to become the minister at this church in Orange County. We've got to stop it. They're talking about me. And I'm thinking, wow, this metaphysical movement, we still haven't cleaned out the skeletons of racism, Mm-hmm. So I walk into the room and I sat right in front of him, front row, and just looked at him, and he changes the subject. Okay. Long story short, I pull out of that. I just said, this is not for me. But I never was going to allow anything outside of myself to determine my destiny, which quickened me to start my own thing. I wasn't going to put myself into a position where a human being was going to choose me, And subsequently, that church when we had that big earthquake back then, split down the middle and was uninhabitable for a long period of time. They had to meet somewhere else. And the woman that they hired to move in really quick so they can say that they were, diverse and everything. They hired a woman really quick. And she ended up pilfering a lot of the money and leaving. So all the things they were worried about happened. Mm-hmm. It was very interesting. But a few years later, they came to Agape and apologized, and they felt very sheepish and humble and just really felt bad, Mm-hmm. That particular experience took me to the depth of forgiveness, because I would not allow them to birth rancor or resentment or animosity in my soul. I wouldn't allow it. I didn't care. They said all kinds of things about me. I never graduated from the school. I had the top class. In terms of taking the test, I had the top ever in history. I didn't graduate. They started all these lies about me, but I wouldn't allow it to infiltrate my mind. And so I taught my students, because they were mad, what they were saying about me and what they were saying about Black people. I said, no, we're not going to go down that path. We're going to bubble up, love them, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And we're going to move forward, which is what we did. Yeah.
So obviously Agape grew into this, massive movement, but in the early days, did you have some imposter syndrome getting up there, talking or trying to find loans to finance buildings and all of these kinds of things?
Would you call it the imposter?
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome. What is that? Well, we had a couple of things that happened. When we moved from Santa Monica to Culver City, they sold the building in Santa Monica. And so that
was that women's building, right?
The Santa Monica Bay Women's Club was the first place we met.
Okay.
We only met there for a month because we grew so fast that they got nervous, because unbeknownst to me at the time, that place was used as a Signs of Mine church many years ago. Mm. And the organ was still there from the previous church. And I remember talking about it in a sermon one day, and they got kind of nervous that maybe I was trying to take over the building or something. I don't know, but we grew so fast that they didn't want us there anymore. So we moved to the Miramar Sheraton Hotel, and we started to grow from the basement to the Wedgwood room, to the Starlight Ballroom, to the biggest room they had. And we had all these extra rooms for the youth ministry. It became it grew quickly. And then, so we got our own building over on Olympic and Centinela in Culver City, and eventually took over another building that Barbara DeAngelis had. She let that go. So we had a nice little campus going on. And then it was sold. It was sold very fast. And we didn't know it was being sold because we may have been wanting to be in the running to get it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So we're meeting in hotel rooms. People had to call a hotline to find out where we were going to meet week to week. It's like, where are they going to be? And so obviously during this time, so we finally find the place at Buckingham. Mm-hmm. And we have a conditional use permit. The politics behind that was this particular area was never to be used for a nonprofit, particularly a church. But there were some people on the city council that really loved our work. And so we had enough votes to get the conditional use permit. The other people put in a couple of obstacles. We had to have it rebuilt in a certain way, according to certain standards. And two, we had to have it completed by a certain period of time, or we would lose the conditional permit. So here I have a staff, I'm paying rent on a building, and I'm paying construction workers to complete the sanctuary. All of this is going on, and I'm really trying not to let go of the staff as well. So the money's dwindling, and it doesn't look like, I mean, linearly, logically, rationally, this is not going to happen, you know. So I call a board meeting on a Saturday. And I also invite the main contractor and a couple of his guys into the board meeting. We're sitting in my office, and we talk about what we have to do and how much money we have to raise by a certain period of time. And people are just really kind of sad about it because it doesn't look like it's going to happen. And so I said, listen, so there's a big guy named Jerry. I had Jerry sit in a chair at the door of my office. I said, nobody's leaving. Jerry, don't let anybody leave. We're going to stay. So I went around in a circle. I said, is it possible for us to raise the money and have this sanctuary completed? We didn't have to have everything completed, but we had to have the sanctuary portion completed with the choir loft, everything to code, so that the choir could stand on it, pass the code, the whole thing. And they said, no, it's doubtful, but it's possible. I would say, hold the possibility. So we went around the whole circle until I got from everybody, it's possible. I said, all I want you to do is just hold the possibility. Don't let your mind go into how we're going to do this. Just hold the field that it's possible. Just hold it for the next week. That's all I want you to do. So we prayed and let everybody go. That was a Saturday. So that Monday or Tuesday, we had applied for a loan. We didn't have any collateral. Obviously, we were a young church. And one of the owners of the bank was going by the guy who had our portfolio, and he looked over his shoulder and says, what are you doing? He says, oh, it's Agape. You know, they want to borrow a few $100,000. They don't have any collateral. And the owner says, is that Beckwith? And he says, yeah, Michael Beckwith. He said, okay, give him the money. He says, what? He says, they don't have any collateral at all. They just want the money. They don't have any collateral to give. He says, is that Beckwith? Yes, give them the money. So in a couple of days, we had the money. So then the contractor calls and says, you know what? I was so moved by that meeting on Saturday. I'm going to double up my crew. I'm going to pay for it out of my own pocket because I know you guys are good for the money, and we will complete this thing by this particular deadline. So within a few days, we had the money, we had the crew working day and night, and it was completed. And there's a photograph of me when we opened. I'm jumping up and I'm higher than the podium. I just jump up really high, going, yeah, like that. So, you know, it was all about possibility, you know, because it linearly, rationally, you know, it shouldn't have happened. But if you hold the field of possibility, with God consciousness, all things are possible. And so that became kind of a rallying point for a lot of things, you know, whenever things get dire and economy's dipping and whatever's going on, you know, what's the possibility here? What's the possibility here? What's the possibility here? Yeah.
What would you say in these 36 years, what are some of the biggest challenges that would surprise people about operating something like an Agape?
Well, it's always financial. not at this moment, but it's been financial. 2008, when the economy tanked based on the nefarious mortgage that people were being given by the thieves in the banks. It caused that whole downward turn. That was pretty big. That was the only time that I had to actually let go of a few staff members based on finances. That's a because you're in constant fundraising all the time. You have ministries, you have staff, you have equipment, you have this and that. And I would probably say that just the best thing about community are the people. The worst thing about the community are people. It's the same thing, because you have every state and stage of just like the world.
Mm-hmm.
You have every state and stage of consciousness there. So, you have people there that are very unconscious, saying and doing things, and you have people that are very conscious that are holding a space. Fortunately, the highest vibration always wins. So the people who are holding the high space always have a much more powerful vibration than people who are having issues, who have not healed their trauma or dramas in their life, or emotional, psychological issues, whatever they might be, and that's a continual thing, Yeah.
I imagine over time, like in the early days, maybe you were the one dealing with a lot of these things, and you had to learn to like insulate yourself a little bit more so you could be fully available and present for being the leader and being on stage and delivering the word and things like that. Was that an easy lesson for you, or did you have to learn the hard way?
You learn, the first 3, 4, 5 years, you learn to develop a thick skin. Mm-hmm. And transcend a lot of that, and you really learn to take nothing personal. After a while, because you start to realize that people are like projecting their unhealed areas onto you. They're projecting their unhealed areas, and they're projecting their own inert or undeveloped powers on you. So you're the screen for, oh, he's magnificent, because they're not only their own magnificence, or he's this and he's that, because they're not. So after a while, you don't take any of that personal. Like I said in the book, Spiritual Liberation, you're able to transcend the two imposters, criticism and praise. You don't run from criticism, and you don't run to praise. You're not there it's just a part of life. Your connection is to the presence, staying true to your mission. And when criticism or stuff comes up, you use it to go within to see where you need to shift your own perception, where you need to heal, where you need to shift. You don't put it back onto anyone else. You say, let me look at that, So I think that when you are a leader like that, you get the first fruits of the teaching, and you also get the first fruits of the growing edge. So you're like growing in the public's eye. Whereas other professions, and the plumber's not growing in the public's eye necessarily. You know what I mean? He may be growing through whatever, but you're not knowing he's coming to fix your pipes. You know what I'm saying? Other people may not have that, where they're in the public's eye and growing at the same time. But when you are a spiritual teacher or leader or somebody that's public, you're actually in the public's eye and growing at the same time. So you have to learn very quickly not to take things personally, how to discern what's yours and what's not yours, to deal with what's yours and not take on what's not yours. All of that becomes a part of your spiritual practice. Yeah.
Do you have a strangest moment on stage story in these 3 decades of being up there 3 times a day on Sundays?
That's strange. I have a couple of them. The two that popped in my mind was one. I was speaking at a Wednesday night service, and it was a deep moment of coherence. And as I was moved into prayer, it was a very transcendent moment. This guy in the back of the sanctuary starts screaming, "You're a black man, you're a black man," like that. I mean, I didn't know what this was, but he was at the top of his lungs. And then Kathy Mack was there. She had red hair. She says, "Kathy Mack has red hair. Kathy Mack has red hair." So we don't know whether this man's on drugs. We don't know what's going on. So he starts to run to the front of where we are. And so some of the security is a little like, what's going on? What's going on? So he stops, he has a cane. He was blind and suddenly got his sight back. And that's when he started screaming out, "You're a black man. Kathy Mack has red hair." He had never seen us.
Wow.
So he never even thought about whether I was black, white, green, red, whatever. He had never seen Kathy Mack. And I said, "What are you saying?" He said, "I was blind. I've been blind. Here's my cane. I've been blind for years. I sit in the back. And when you started praying, my sight came back. And I did, you're a black man." He said, "I'm not racist, but I got excited, you know." I always remember that was very funny, you know.
Wow.
And then there was a moment, I have to go to the original story, then I can go to the Wednesday night service where this happened. When I was 27, I think it was about 26, 27 years old, I was still embracing what my destiny would be. I hadn't at that point committed to starting any kind of community. You know, I was working with people and things like that. But I was driving to the Valley to speak at a senior citizen center. Someone had suggested that I could come speak to the seniors. And so I agreed. I said, "Yeah, I'll come speak." So it had been raining. So when I'm driving to the Valley and I go up, it's so crystal clear. I mean, you know how LA is after it rains. It was just like pristine. And I had this tremendous vision of my life. It just caught me. And I saw myself in the future. And myself in the future said to me, "You're on the right path. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. It's going to be okay. I'm here. I'm here," something like that. And I got it. And so I went on to speak, and it was a nice talk and everything. I always remember that. So fast forward, that now I'm at Agape. This is years later, I'm at Agape. I'm speaking on a Wednesday night, and I go into this beautiful, very expanded stage. I'm driving home, I'm crying because it was so moved by the state I'm in. And I'm pulling up to my garage, and suddenly I see Michael at 27. And Michael's wondering about his destiny. And I say to him, "Don't worry, I am here. You did all right. I'm with you now." So I had the perspective of when I said it at 27, and I came and spoke to me. And then I had the perspective of me speaking to my 27-year-old and telling him, "I'm here. You keep doing what you're doing. We're here." And then at that precise moment, there was something over here to my right, another aspect of myself saying, "There's more. There's more." That's always a very pivotal moment in my life. Allows me to lean into whatever I'm going through. I'm leaning into an awareness at my core that everything is all right and everything's going to be okay, even if I can't physically see it. It's just that kind of experience just kind of magnifies that feeling. Yeah.
I remember going to Agape, and I would study you. I would watch you up on stage. I noticed your eyes were closed a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm wondering if, after hearing all this, I'm wondering if you were doing the same thing you did in that 5th grade class. Are you, how much is it channeled, and how much is it pre-prepared what you're going to be talking about, or how you're going to be talking
There's not
about
a lot pre-prepared, but in the first days, my eyes were closed all the time, pretty much closed. And I would catch the message. And it was different techniques that I would use. And then as I matured, I became more of the message. So it wasn't channeling. It was more like me. It was more like, this is me speaking. But it was like you could say my higher self, can use different kind of language, but it wasn't. In the younger version of me, it's like I'm channeling energy. The more mature version of me, it's actually more integrated into me, because if I spoke on a Sunday back in those days, then whatever I spoke about became my personal lesson of embodiment. in terms of meditation, in terms of prayer, in terms of just taking it on, you see, until that was integrated into me. And so now when I get up to speak, then I had to train myself to keep my eyes open. I remember somebody telling me I was being rude by speaking with my eyes closed. I didn't really take it as being rude, but I started to train myself to actually be able to keep my eyes open and hear the message, catch the message, be the frequency of the message, you see. Now, I'll tell you a little thing that used to happen sometimes. I would be speaking and let's say I'm speaking about something. I don't know where I'm going when I get to the end of the sentence. I just know I'm going, and I know when I get to the end of the sentence, what I need is going to be there. So I'm going. And it used to be these like balloons, like here, for lack of a better word, little bubbles. And I could pop one. And when I would pop one, then this information would flow that would be right in sync with what I just said. I could pop any one of them and they would flow with what I just said, you know. So that used to fascinate me a lot. You know, now I just like, I throw myself open. I have a theme. I have a topic. I don't have it, like, for instance, this is whatever day it is. It's not, you know, I don't have a topic for this week yet. I have a theme. I don't have the topic. Topic will come today or tomorrow. And what I do when I go to sleep at night, I'll open myself up to whatever the message is supposed to be, and I might just get a sentence. That's a sentence, but the sentence will take me through a corridor of transformational knowledge. Just a sentence. So I'll speak, and then I'll say, here's the topic, here's the sentence, and then I'll roll with it, and then it'll take me into where it's supposed to go based on the congregation often, you know. Now, years ago, I did 3 services, and all 3 were basically different. But what began to happen was people wouldn't leave because they knew I was going to say something different in the next service. So I trained myself to, I would speak, like I speak now on 9 o'clock. It's not like memorization, but it's like, I'll speak. And then when I go into 11 o'clock service, I throw myself into the spiritual abyss, and I can catch the pattern of everything I already said, even though it might be a little different. It might be a little focused based on who's there, but I eliminate people just waiting and coming for 3 services because I'm going to say something different, you know.
I was just going to ask you that. Do you feel more connected, or is there a pattern that you notice? Because you've done this again many Sundays, where one service is like the one that is the most, I don't know, original or less contrived or whatever, however you define that quality.
The first one's the way of meditation service. I teach on meditation, then we meditate. And then the second one at 9 o'clock, that one, for the most part, is like, I hear it the first time. It's the second one is good. But for me, that one is like, oh, you know, that was good. I got to remember that, you know. It used to be in the old days, the second one was always better because I was like getting revved up or getting opened or something. Now it's like, because I don't leave anything on the playing field, you know. Right. It's like when I speak, I'm not holding anything back. Whatever needs to come out, comes out. So it's like, I've given it. Boom. So then I got to do it again at 11. So it's still very good. It's wonderful. But that first one has a little bit more sauce on it for me.
You have so many, I don't know if you call them Michaelisms or Beckwithisms, but things like, don't listen to what I'm saying, listen to what I'm listening to. I remember you saying that in church one Sunday years and years ago, and I always remembered that.
Yeah.
Do those often come through you and you're like, that was great, I'm going to write that down and include it in my next book?
Yeah, they'll come through, or just in the moment, you know, a certain way of saying something will come through. And Kathy Mack, who sits next to me at service, she oftentimes would like take notes and then give it to me. It's like, this, do you realize you said this, this, and this? I said, oh, let me have that, because I want to say that again. I want to say that again the next service. And what happens is, like yesterday, she was here with Jason, and they go through my talk, and that's where they pull the affirmations from. They actually take my sentences that I'm teaching more like and turn them into affirmations. So when we're doing those affirmations on Sunday, they actually curated from a talk in that month. Yeah.
How do you feel when you see yourself talking? Do you feel like you just like, how do you feel?
I very rarely watch myself. When I do, I'm always surprised. It's like I'll see myself do certain things, and sometimes a little embarrassed, but sometimes it's like, oh, did I jump up like that? It's like, what? I did that, because I'm not aware I'm doing that in the moment. I'm just in the flow of energy. But now I'll look at him and I'll say, you know what? If I had to go to a spiritual community, I would go listen to that guy.
Let's talk about Take Back Your Mind, because we're winding down here. Why now? Why'd you decide, after all these years, everyone has a podcast, everyone and their mother, why'd you decide, okay, now it's time for me to have a podcast? And what are you bringing to the podcast world?
I wanted to do two things. I wanted to bring the message out in a different way. And I'm aware that people are listening to podcasts, and podcasts are one of the last territories for like free thinking. We can have a conversation. You're not going to be cut off by the powers that be with what you say yet, And so I wanted to have the freedom to do that, even more so than on the pulpit, where I have an audience and you have to be in a certain framework of spiritual worship. Whereas the podcast, we can go into deeper questions, deeper dialogue. And I just wanted to be a part of a growing movement of individuals who are seeking to have people take back their mind. I mean, the reality is curated for people on the news. It's a very curated bit of reality. A lot of it's not true. A lot of it's just a narrative that society, the government, big tech, big pharma, whatever, wants you to have. And so I wanted to be a part of a growing voice of something outside of that curated narrative that may or may not even be true, or it's a limited version of truth. And then have people come on. I'm gonna have you come on. Have these people come on, and we have dialogue about spiritual growth, development, and unfoldment, or whatever's happening in the world from a different perspective.
Yeah, I was going to say, I listened to some of the episodes because I know a lot of the people on there, and it seems very conversational. It's not like question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. It's mostly like just you all just sitting like almost at a kitchen table or over tea or something talking. Is that intentional?
Yes, absolutely. Just because, as you say, most people I know these people. These are my friends. These are not like Hollywood friends. You know what I mean? I know these folks. And I wanted to lean into their latest insights, what's coming up, and pepper the audience with different ways of understanding truth, whether it's Bruce Lipton with science, whether it's Sean Stevenson and the research he does, or whoever it is, Yeah.
What's the vision? I know you visioned this, so can you give us a little glimpse into where this is going for you?
There's a lot happening behind the scenes, but actually, I mean, we do want the podcast to capture a lot of people. So I want to be able to eventually say some things that's not going to be allowed on the news. I want to be able to tell people that which is eternally true, that I want to tell people, actually, that's a lie that you just heard on Channel 4, whatever the case may be. That's not truth. I want to wake up people, It's fun to wake up people. We've come out of a very intense period of time where polarization has been at an all-time high, and people are disliking each other because they don't agree. And I want to be a voice of unity, and harmony and truth teaching,
Mm.
Yeah.
You are by far the person that has had the most metaphysical experiences, like the sort of esoteric experiences that I've ever met before. I'm curious, have you ever met anybody who's had as many as you have? Like obvious.
Um, I have a couple of friends, the gurus, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
that
Non-guru people I'm talking about.
Well, there's a couple of there's a couple of my friends, but they're also like what they do for a living is they're a medium. You know what I mean? They have those kind of gifts. I think people are having these experiences, but because they're not, they quickly close down to them.
Mm.
They're not. Like for me, I think for me, I was hard-headed because I was an atheist. So I had a lot of dramatic experiences that I probably needed to have. Howard Thurman calls certain people once-born souls, whereas they came in with a certain openness and availability and a surrender to the presence, so they may not have needed to have any dramatic experience because they came in kind of available. I didn't come in like that. I mean, as a kid, yes, but I closed myself off to become normal. So I had a lot of dramatic experiences, but those dramatic realizations and experiences really feed me, because as I said earlier, it allows me to lean into this awareness of everything is all right and everything's going to be okay. I have that built in. Like my dad had it from another perspective. My mother had it from another perspective. And I think I got the best of both of them combined with a spiritual awakening, Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for making the time and again, being so generous in your sharings and storytelling. And,
you pulled it out, man, because normally we don't go into stuff like this.
Again, I'm honored to be able to have this conversation. I look forward to getting a chance to see you again, hopefully when I get back to LA. You guys are still doing the live? Have you started back?
Absolutely. Agape is live in person at 11 a.m. for the meditation and the 11:30 for the worship celebration fellowship service. But all three services are live streamed on our Facebook page, on agapelive.com, and on our YouTube page. Yeah.
Beautiful. And what day are you publishing your new episodes for your podcast?
It drops every Wednesday.
Okay. Fantastic.
Yeah.
We'll put everything in the show notes and just, sending you lots of love and light, and just grateful that you're out in the world still. And I get to be here on this plane of existence to experience it for this sliver of time.
Well, thank you, Brother Light Watkins. I appreciate you. Appreciate the work you're doing. You're on it, man. I watch people, and this is what I see. Because I can see people who know about it, like people who know it. You're one of those people who know it. You have a real meditation practice, so you have a thing that is very real and authentic. So I've always appreciated that.
Thank you.
I love we have the same barber. I appreciate that.
Right. You're new to the barber, though, relatively speaking.
Relative a few years. I went to Egypt a few years ago and I was having a rebirth. And I said, I'm gonna cut off my hair. I was going to cut it off in the king's chamber, but there was no electricity, there's no light. I couldn't really. So I just waited till I got back to the States. And as soon as I arrived back to the United States, I had it shaved off and been that way ever since. Yeah.
If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. Click this thumbnail right here, and I'll see you over there.